Guys, I think I finally figured out the X-Men's biggest flaw. After browsing through the animated series, the movies, and some pretty old comics, I realized that the X-Men have a lot of problems. There's discrimination, the occasional alien attack, Magneto being an absolute douchebag, Apocalypse being the GOAT, the overly complicated time-traveling problems Cable and Bishop have caused.
No, it's too much. It's too much.
And that's just a few of their problems. But through it all, I noticed the biggest problem that the X-Men have, the one fatal flaw that seems to have put them in a lot of trouble, is Charles Xavier. Yep, that is absolutely right. Professor X is by far the biggest fatal flaw of the X-Men, and I'll prove it. So get your black colored leather uniforms and oversized masks ready. We're going deep into the mind of one of the most powerful telepaths in the Marvel Universe. But before we dive into it, welcome back to Keepin' It Comic. I'm your host, GR, aka GoofyRhexxi. Now, like a lot of you, it was hard for me to imagine Charles Xavier, Professor X, as someone who is at the root of a lot of the problems faced by the X-Men. But I had to sit back and critically look at things from a logical perspective. And I narrowed it down to 3 things that Professor X does that really drives this point home. The very first thing is his cover-ups. Now, it's easy to think about a lot of the things that Xavier does as good because of his motives and goals. I mean, he is a man with means, and his main goal is to protect the Earth from villainous threats, as well as ensure the survival of the mutant race while simultaneously establishing peaceful coexistence between humans and mutants. But in his efforts to do that, Xavier has covered up a lot of crap, which has ultimately hurt the team. One of which is what he did to Cyclops in the comics. In the original X-Men comics, Xavier formed the X-Men team when he realized that Earth faced threats from villainous entities both within and outside of Earth. This was right after Lucifer dropped a big ass stone on his legs, might I add. In realization of these threats, he recruited the likes of Cyclops, Beast, Jean Grey, who at the time was called Marvel Girl, Angel, and Iceman. But over the years, this team has changed its lineup to include more members, more individuals, and more abilities. But then, in X-Men Genesis, we find out that Charles once formed a team of X-Men with Cyclops being their leader, no surprise there, and he sent them out on a rescue mission that failed, and most of the team members perished, leaving Cyclops as the sole survivor. But what did Charles do? He wiped Cyclops' memory, made him forget the demise of his comrades, formed a new team, and sent them out once more. I mean, the sheer audacity of this man. Charles often uses his abilities to cover up a lot of messes that lead to problems for the team further on down the line. He did the same thing to Jean. He suppressed her abilities, locked up parts of her mind, and ensured that she didn't have access to the full extent of her abilities. And this led her down the path to becoming the Dark Phoenix. We know how that played out in the comics, and in more actuality, we saw it both in X-Men The Last Stand and in X-Men The Dark Phoenix movie. In X-Men The Last Stand, he suppressed Jean's mind, and boom, she ended up unaliving lots of people. Scott gets popped, Charles gets popped, and a bunch of other mutants? Well, you get the point. And then in Dark Phoenix, he didn't even tell her about her father, and the realization of it all forced her into accidentally killing Mystique, leading Hank and Eric to launch a vendetta against Jean, which really complicated things. So yeah, there's a lot of problems that arise with Xavier's cover-ups. A lot of the time, it just feels like he's lazy to put in the work and always looking for the easy way out, because he could have helped Jean by slowly removing the limiter on her powers so she can better control it, thereby reducing the amount of casualties that arose with her losing control. But nah, let's just block it all out until it all comes to bite them in the ass later. But this is all just the tip of the iceberg. Xavier starts to pose a real problem when you truly get into the way that he treats his job and the rationale behind some of his actions. But before we go on, be sure to lock in on that like and that subscribe button. We're on a journey here to 1,000 subscribers, and we definitely need your help. Thank you in advance. Now, let's talk about this man's job. This one is probably the one I struggle with the most, because when you really think about it, Charles Xavier is really bad at his job. I stated earlier that some of the main objectives of the X-Men are to secure the safety of Earth from villainous threats and ensure the safety of members of mutant kind while establishing peace between humans and mutants. And how well has he done that? And that's something that we have to talk about. But for now, let's focus on him establishing peace with humans and keeping mutants safe. In the X-Men First Class, Xavier wipes out the mind of Moira because he feels that this is the best way to protect the secrets of the X-Men. But then in X-Men Apocalypse, Apocalypse, he ends up needing her help once again. I mean, this was potentially an ally that could have helped them negotiate peace talks with the government, and he was like, nah, I'll pass on that. What about the safety of the mutants? We found out in Wolverine Origins number 28 that he wiped out Wolverine's old memories and then implanted new ones to meet his demands. Now, to be fair, Wolverine was originally there to take him out, but wiping his memory and forcing him to work for you against his will, that's basically slavery. And that's how Xavier treats his fellow mutants. And you would think that this treatment only extends to his enemies and not people he doesn't want to put in danger, but even his students aren't really that safe. The Xavier protocols are a very fine example of that. There's an instruction manual on how to take out every one of his mutants if they should ever turn evil. But the thing is, he did a lousy job of securing such sensitive data, which ultimately led to the secrets being accessed by their enemies more than once, putting a lot of X-Men in danger. And as far as Xavier's school for the gifted youngsters goes, how many times has the school been destroyed in the comics or in the movies, or assaulted by government officials, or the students getting kidnapped by unfriendly foes? I mean, if it wasn't for Quicksilver coming back in the nick of time in the X-Men Apocalypse movie, almost every single mutant in the school would have died. The school is literally set up on the X-Men base of operations, where they carry out their super secret missions against their many enemies. I don't know why no one told them that this choice was going to endanger the students right upstairs. That's literally like putting a police station at a local high school in the same building. It's just not a good strategy in terms of safety. And let's be honest, guys, it is high time that we call out Xavier for child endangerment. I mean, this dude over and over again puts kids and teenagers next to grown adult men and sends them out to deadly missions, and everyone is like, yeah, this is totally fine. I don't know what you're saying. Yes, they're gifted youngsters with amazing abilities, but they're still just kids. I mean, children literally have to face big bads like Juggernaut, Magneto, freaking Apocalypse, and aliens from outer space. And don't even get me started on Onslaught. That's a whole nother bag of worms that I'm not about to get into here. You got adult soldiers with years of training that end up on war fronts and heavy fire battles, and they suffer from PTSD because of the hardships that they saw. Yet you send out kids to the battlefronts where they lose close friends and consistently have to face danger and bigotry. Imagine the psychological effects that this will have on these kids. No wonder Jean is going crazy. No wonder why Rogue is constantly losing control of her abilities, or why Wolverine is always so damn angry. Although, to be fair, that might just be a Wolverine thing. Xavier puts them through the ringer, and now they're all unstable. And this leads up to my last point, his teachings. With everything I've mentioned so far, imagine the legacy and consequences Charles Xavier's teachings and doctrines have had on these kids, and the effect it's had on Earth and all of its inhabitants. Well, as far as keeping the world safe goes, you have to admit that it's not going that well. We know it's because no matter how many times Xavier and his team seem to save the day, either Bishop or Cable come from the future and try to change things because the future is just a lousy place to live. In the great scheme of things, Xavier's ideals have never been able to keep the world or his followers safe. Mutants are still despised and hated. Magneto is still on the loose trying to end all humans because, of course, they're despised and hated. Apocalypse continues to come back and wreak havoc, and Mr. Sinister keeps, well, being sinister. Onslaught wants to slaughter, and so on and so on. The world is really not that much of a better place because of his ideals, and that's not the only thing his teachings are doing. It's also helped put his messiah complex on the minds of these kids. I mean, what do you expect when you put a bunch of kids and implant the idea that they're superheroes into their minds? I mean, do you know that most of the kids that graduate from Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters just end up being X-Men? A vast majority of the people who graduate from the school have no intention of joining society and living a somewhat normal and safe life. Everyone opts for the heroic path, the seemingly attractive life of being a superhero. But as we've established, it really isn't safe to be in the X-Men. The chances of you losing your life within your first mission are incredibly high. Xavier's teachings have prompted a lot of these youngsters to seek danger, to always put themselves in harm's way, and it's honestly messed up with a lot of their minds mentally and psychologically. And the funny thing is, they don't really get the help that they need after it all. There's no real therapy or systems put in place to help them really deal with everything that happens to them. We see this in the character Legion in the Age of X storyline, where he convinced Myra McTaggart to alter the timeline and prevent the formation of the X-Men so that he can be the savior of mankind. We see this in Wanda Maximoff and in the House of N comics, where she made drastic changes to the timeline based on her mental instability. It's the same with Nightcrawler, who has to reconcile his demonic appearance with his love for God. There's just a lot of room for instability. It seems to be a recurring theme for a lot of mutants across the entire X-Men franchise. Charles Xavier is the biggest flaw in the cog that is the X-Men. The fact that he covers up a lot of things The fact that he's bad at his job, the fact that his teachings and ideas have actually done more harm than good to the members of the mutant race than otherwise. I mean, don't get me wrong, Charles has helped a lot of mutants and he's even saved a lot of lives, but in the grand scheme of things, his actions have led to more tragedies for the X-Men than we could ever have imagined. Maybe this man might be the next character that we throw into the pit. So let me know what you think about this theory here in the comments below, and also be sure to let me know what your thoughts are about the rebooted X-Men series, as well as check out our other videos on X-Men like this one right here where we recap the 5 seasons of the X-Men animated series. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel here. Check out our links that are down below in the description, and as always guys, thanks so much for kicking it with Keepin' It Comic.